Now, Peter Dutton got a lot of criticism as Defence Minister when he told Australians to prepare for war. Critics were saying he was just trying to scare voters into voting Liberal. But yesterday, Taiwan reported 30 Chinese warplanes flew into its air defence zone in the southwest in what seems to be a warning or a preparation for war. Something very serious is going on. Joining me is Australia's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of The Australian. Greg, thanks for your time. What is going on?
Well, Andrew, you're right to be very concerned about it. This is extremely dangerous behaviour by the Chinese. They do this with the Taiwanese, with the Japanese and with the Americans. They engage in extremely dangerous manoeuvres in air, taking their fighter planes right up to foreign fighter planes, and they do it at sea as well. And they won't have any safety hotlines or anything like that. They won't have any agreed rules of the road. Now, because they don't recognise Taiwan's right to exist or its sovereignty or anything else, they don't recognise its air defence identification zone. Now, that means when they breach that zone, the Taiwanese have to scramble fighter jets in case the Chinese are about to attack. Now, it is possible that an attack could be disguised as one of these kind of routine sort of aggressive manoeuvres that the Chinese undertake, although probably they'd have to follow up with a whole lot of other stuff, which you would probably see in the preparation. I think it's designed to demoralise the Taiwanese, it's a bit of braggadocio. It shows too how hypocritical the Chinese are when they say they're offering olive branches and they've put away their wolf warrior diplomacy and so forth. It's all transactional, it's all tactical, and they hope one day that they'll get Taiwan to submit without a war. I don't think they will. I think they'll have to go to war if they want to reclaim Taiwan.
Now, China has been trying to sign up 10 Pacific Island countries to our east, to a security alliance. As I reported last night, it got rejected in a meeting with the Chinese Foreign Minister in Fiji yesterday. Is this humiliating for China?
Not exactly. It's a rare reverse, but China is very persistent. Beijing is very persistent. The multilateral agreement is less important than the bilateral agreements of the type that it's signed with Solomon Islands. It wants to get a military base. It has no other reason to be active in the Pacific. It wanted to expunge any nation's diplomatic recognition of Taiwan. It's just about done that. The only thing it's really interested in is securing a military base, and that will come more from a bilateral agreement. The multilateral agreement is important because it would normalise China interfering in South Pacific security matters, but they're very persistent. Australia won round one. That's great. Credit to Albanese and Wong, because they're certainly going to get the blame for bad stuff that happens on their watch. But this is, at best, round one in a 15-round or perhaps 55-round boxing match. And, they're a super heavyweight and we're a light middleweight.
Absolutely. And basically, I think all the focus on Australia, it really is also up to America to do something in this space. They've got deeper pockets for a start. Now, Greg, you wrote a terrific piece in the Australian newspaper today attacking Labor's idea of changing the Constitution to divide us by race by creating this Aboriginal-only advisory parliament. They say, oh, it's only advisory, but you wait. Once it gets in there, people will be saying, we can't have a merely symbolic parliament for Aborigines. It's got to have teeth. It's got to be able to do something. That'll be the next battle. But you didn't write this piece without some fear.
No, well, Andrew, I hope I don't embarrass you by telling the viewers that I took your counsel on the matter. Almost anyone so the people who advocate this voice, many of them brand anyone who opposes it as a racist or at least a fool and ignorant. Now, being called a fool and ignorant is not so bad, but being called a racist by an advocate of the voice is really a very career-limiting and damaging move. And all the Conservatives who support this, I'm sure they do absolutely sincerely. I wouldn't for a minute cast aspersions on their motives. But of course, Conservatives love to have one issue on which they're uber progressive to show that, while they might be hated as black-hearted reactionaries generally, they can be warm and cuddly over this issue. But this is a terrible proposal, and Malcolm Turnbull, alone amongst recent Liberal leaders, gave proper leadership on this. His pages in his memoir saying why this is wrong, a quasi-parliamentary body to be elected only by members of one race in Australia contradicts the basic Liberal principle that race has no role in civic life. All Australians, any Australian citizen is equal with every other. Yeah, I mean, if you migrated here, if you're a Hmong Hill tribesman and you got your citizenship 1 minute ago, you are just as good as me and just as entitled to any civic consideration as me or as to anyone else. Now, also, it is impossible that if you stick this in the Constitution, the High Court won't get involved in the end. Even if they say it can't veto legislation, well, then there'll be a question of how long does it get to consider legislation? Did the federal parliament allow it long enough? Then there's a question of what legislation affects Indigenous people. I mean, every bit of legislation affects Indigenous people. If we're going to war, does the voice have to ratify that? Then there's the simple other, the other question of equity. Most Indigenous people, the biggest population, live in Western Sydney. Why would they have any more insight into what policies should be applied in a remote Aboriginal community in Arnhem Land than anybody else? I mean, this is, in my opinion, this is a terrible breach of fundamental values of a liberal society.
And I tell you what, Greg, we haven't even had time to discuss what I think is a really big con. They say they want to put this in the Constitution. Well, actually, they could just pass a simple act of Parliament, next month, wave it through, because the Greens and Labor together are all for this sort of stuff. Well, the Greens still got some doubts about some issues, but they could put it in. We could see if it worked. When they say put in the Constitution, what they mean is when it's in the Constitution, it's almost impossible to take out of the Constitution. If it turns out something you don't like, you can't get rid of it. And that's the whole thing. Why do they do this? Why won't they let us test drive this thing, see what it's like, before we even vote it into a Constitution? There is a con at work here. It is fundamentally undemocratic as well, because it wants to tie the hands of future generations. Greg Sheridan, I'm sorry that I ended on the rant. I don't have time to ask for your response. That'll have to be next week. Thank you so much for your time.